Greetings, this is Ama Bookman with Ile Eko Omoluapi. We're a Pan-Africanist channel that focuses on African philosophy, history, culture, and ethics in the Yoruba tradition. If you're new to this channel, Ile Eko Omoluapi means the school of child of character in Yoruba. And one of the characteristics of a person of character in Yoruba ethical teachings is Opolo Pipe, which literally means perfect or complete brain. In other words, part of having good character is being intelligent. It requires the perfect exercise of the mind to understand your environment and to make decisions about your world. Our guest today, Dr. Chika Ezeanya-Esiobu, exemplifies that intelligence needed to bring about the development on the African continent. Dr. Esiobu holds a PhD in African Development and Policy Studies from Howard University. She's a principal at Julani Varsity, the founder of African Child Press, and the writer of this book, Indigenous Knowledge and Education in Africa, which is going to be what we're going to focus our conversation on today. Thank you so much for being here and welcome.
You're welcome. Pleasure is mine.
So I want to start with a little passage from your book. It's actually on the first page. So the way I found out about you was you did a TED Talk a while ago, and then I saw that TED Talk. I think it was sometime last year, and I was like, I got to get this book. Really enjoyed reading this book. Highly recommend that you guys purchase it. Let me start with this sentence. One of the reasons for the absence of widespread innovative research and development in Africa is the result of foreign paradigm upon which the development efforts in the region is premised. The assumption here, based on anecdotes, mass media information, and data from a few publications on indigenous African knowledge, is that the African realities still encompass indigenous knowledge on various levels. Although this knowledge receives little, if any, recognition from academic research, development, and institutions. On the continent, there are numerous NGOs, presumably who are here to help with training indigenous Africans to employ advanced methods to build their economies. Now, your writing here suggests that far from being helpful, this might actually be an impediment to development. Can you explain that position for us?
Sure. I think one quick explanation to the abundance of NGOs and intergovernmental organizations and other development, and I use that word development loosely and cautiously, other development platforms across the continent, the inability for them to achieve the so-called, again, development aims is that there is an outside-in approach to development. It is superimposed. It is not organic. It does not spring from the core of the people, from the core of society. Julius Nyerere, the former president of Tanzania, once said, and I paraphrase, that development is not something you do for a people. Development is what a people come together to agree on how to, if you want to use the word implement, on how to come together to strategize on what their goals, their aspirations, and what they really need to, where they want to be at a point in time. And my argument is that because of the nature, the foundational, the way African societies were founded, if you may, present or modern African societies, countries, they did not have the luxury of fashioning their own, first of all, articulating their own development trajectory, and also having the independence to walk that path. It has been from modern history a question of other societies, other countries trying to fashion development goals for African countries, and also indeed working on taking Africa to the development goals not fashioned by Africans. And historically, no country has developed following that path. African countries must agree on what development means and how to get there.
I'd
One,
like, oh,
okay.
sorry. No, please.
Oh, yeah. So one quick way, one quick example is looking at the question of the environment, for instance. So we understand that the development trajectory, development pathway of the West has been detrimental to the environment, tragic actually, to sustainability. There just is no way that all the plastic making its way into the ocean and all the, all the degradation of the ozone layer happening as a result of Western industrialization and advancement will be sustained even if Africa, for instance, does not join that, does not reach that level of industrialization. If the West alone should continue as is without other countries like from Africa, for instance, joining in making the environment worse, it's not even going to last us the next 50 years the way, according to scientists. So how about if Africa decides that it will no longer toe that path and find more environmentally friendly way of manufacturing and find more sustainable and even health-friendly ways of storing food and packaging food that is not plastic. That is just one simple example that we're looking at. So if Africa's advancement trajectory still towards the Western line, follows the Western approach, which is already so unsustainable, how are we, where will the world be in the next 50 years? And I'm glad to say that there are African countries, for instance, that are taking this initiative. Rwanda has banned the use of plastic bags. And I don't know of any other Western country of any other country in the world, for instance, where you are not allowed to use plastic bags. Once you get to the airport in Rwanda, you cannot, if you have visible plastic bags, custom officers take it away from you. And that's it.
That is
And very much so. And the government is also working on banning plastic straws, plastic bottles, packaging bottles, and just so much. And do you understand? So that is a completely different strategy. So how about Rwandan scientists now working on developing alternative methods of storage? So Rwandans historically have used straws to drink water made from bamboo. So these hundreds of years ago, as far back as Rwandan history, it's a culture that consumes, that is very much into drinking healthy fermented milk, fermented sorghum, and they would use this really nice long bamboo straws and kind of drink communally. Of course, we're not asking that we go back to verbatim to what was obtainable but we want to look for ways to continue that sustainable bamboo straw, manufacturing bamboo straws sustainably. And just one example of what we are talking about as far as the whole idea. And people talk of Rwanda today as a country that has advanced exponentially, and part of that is because of this emphasis on indigenous knowledge to bring about advancement. rather than relying solely on imported ideas and Western models for advancement.
I believe I may have heard this from you or maybe somebody else, but I think they also use some indigenous methods of conflict resolution after the Rwandan genocide. Was that something I either read or heard from you or somebody else? Are you familiar? I can't remember now.
That is exactly so. Gachacha was an indigenous judicial system that was implemented to try genocide suspects. After the genocide, it was simply impossible for the country to afford lawyers. Where were the lawyers? They were killed or either in exile, or or even in prison for committing genocide. So there were no lawyers to try cases of genocide. So the country went back to the indigenous judicial system of Gachacha, and that was able to clear genocide cases in record time and bring about some sort of acceptance, both on the part of those who committed the crimes and the victims, who all rallied around that judicial system in order to allow the country to, the decisions of the judicial system were acceptable to both sides, and that allowed the country to move forward.
I want to move to a different question of land ownership. So in Nigeria, we see a lot of challenges around land, whether it's, how do agriculturalists and herders balance, their claims to the land, but also, you see other cases where people who have been displaced are squatting and how the government reacts to them. The emphasis on, buying land that may not have been there before. And there was something else you said here that I thought was relevant to that question. So you kind of went into some different things. It's a long, paragraph, and I'm not going to read it all. It says the indigenous African economic system did not and still does not permit the outright sale of land. So when I was in Ghana, for example, I learned that you can buy this land technically for up to like 99 years, but you can't really, and you can renew it, I guess, or somebody else can renew it for another term of 99 years, but you don't own it in perpetuity. As a means, so cannot outright buy land or sell land as a means of production, unlike in Western economic system. Can you explain what are some of the differences you see or you continue to see today in terms of how land is perceived as both something you own or something you use to produce? Do you see that being encroached upon? And how can returning to that contribute to developmental efforts or even to conflict resolution?
Thank you for the question. Traditionally, Africans don't sell their lands, forever, as you rightly said, and that was a bit confusing to the missionaries and to the colonial masters who came, because in exchange for a bottle of wine, African kings gave portions of land to missionaries for their use, and believing it as in their own culture, that they were just extending this property for the use of these colonial masters or the missionaries. But in the eyes of the missionaries coming from the Western world, they drafted these agreements which African leaders could not read, drafted in English or French or Portuguese, or Arabic, as the case were, and made African kings sign away their lands. So you will see vast tracts of land. That's part of what was obtainable in South Africa. And that would be called deceit in law. Okay, so because it was not properly spelled out, there was these differences in understanding of culture and what selling of land entailed in those days. What the whole idea of homelessness, the whole idea of people being disenfranchised, the idea of landlessness and disempowerment actually can be traced to the whole understanding of land ownership as private property. In Africa, in many African communities, land is owned communally. And that obtains even today, but that will be in the villages, in the rural areas. In the cities are, of course, very much commercialized, but in rural areas, you find that as long as you belong to a family, you had access to some property, because the property does not belong to one person. It belongs to the family, and you don't find homelessness in rural areas. So people will always have their homes, because if you don't have land, if you can't lay claim to where you place your feet on, what can you lay claim to really? The air you breathe. So that is what we actually continue to advocate for, a situation where there can be a hybrid, because we find that the whole idea of commercializing property or private ownership of property is encroaching into rural Africa, where some form of factories are being produced, or businesses are setting up, and people are moving to go live in these rural areas. As a result, the introduction of land as private property is becoming more and more something that African rural areas are getting enlightened about. Individuals are beginning to sell off family land in exchange for money. And yes, the contract says 99 years, but for the most part, these individuals sell this land. They don't even know where the papers are, and they die off, okay, let's say after 50, 60, 70 years, and their children don't even know their father had land of that nature to go start asking for renewal of the property. And it's almost as if once you buy land, that's it, the land belongs to you. So in that sense, that will be what we, at this point, try to advocate. It will be hard to say that across Africa, in Durban, in Joburg, Nairobi, Lagos, we should revert back to the family system of ownership, because in these cities, you can't even trace families anymore. You can't even trace ancestral lands anymore. It's gone from hand to hand over so many years. Some were reclaimed from the colonial masters by African governments that I'm not sure if that will still, it would probably not be feasible. But in those communities where ancestral lands are still in the hand of community, I think we should look for ways to preserve communal ownership of property, in order to not begin to see what we see in the West today, which is homelessness and displacement, internal displacement now, not external displacement as in terms of refugee, but internally displaced people. That will be one way for Africa to chart a unique and indigenous pathway to land ownership, continue to find ways to advance communal ownership of property, even when there is encroachment of industrialization across rural communities. How do we ensure that individuals don't sell off family land to corporations, and individuals don't sell family land to wealthy individuals, and then leave the rest of the family displaced, or even generations to come displaced? But we don't find this conversation. We are Africans at this time are much more interested in talking about foreign investors, industrialization, pardon me?
I said creating jobs,
Creating jobs. And what happens after you create jobs for 10% and leave 90% displaced and homeless as a result of that? So those are things that we should really look into, not conversation in development.
Absolutely. So that actually brings me to something else you said. You talked when the idea of, when they made these agreements for might have seemed like frivolous things, like here's a bottle of wine or something like that. They did not think of themselves as, making, selling off their resources in the same way. So you made a distinction here between indigenous Western ways of thinking and indigenous ways of thinking. Let me find it so I can share it with our readers. Indigenous knowledge views the world as interrelated. It is not necessarily subordinate all other life forms to mankind, as they are all interrelated and interdependent parts of one ecosystem. Western science views mankind as superior to nature and authorized to exploit it maximally. And I thought that was a really poignant point, and it connected to what you said earlier about the environment. So I just wanted you to elaborate for us on this relationship to nature, this way of thinking about how we know, how we come to know nature, and how we come to use that knowledge.
Thank you for the question. Quite needed, intelligent, of course, necessary to respond to in the conversation. African traditional or indigenous knowledge respects nature, respects the environment, does not treat the environment as a product to be exploited for the benefit of the African, for the financial, if you may, benefit of the African. And indigenous knowledge, the environment is viewed as an intricate part of humanity. And humanity, man exists within an environment. And because of that, he or she must respect and preserve the environment. So within African culture, you find instances of saying of different communities saying that there are trees that should not be cut for any reason, or you can't cut those trees. And even if you have to cut such trees, you have to perform such rituals and sacrifices. That's a deterrent to cutting down the trees. And also, or you don't fish in that water. And if you cultivate a plot of land for a certain period of time, you have to allow it to rest and find some other plot of land to cultivate. And you cook, you get your food from the ground, and you cook with earth made from the ground. You don't cook with stainless steel and plastic in the microwave and all of that scientists have come to say leach into the food we eat today. So it's from earth you get your food, and respectfully you cook with earth. And because Africans believe that the body was actually made from earth initially, and scientists have established that as well. And as a result of that, we find that that is just something that keeps perpetuating, that is sustainable. So it's all about respect for the environment and respect for humanity. The environment is not there for us to use for our own benefit, but it is there for us to interact with, to make sure that we give back to the environment because it gives so much to us. That is the whole philosophy guiding the interrelationship between man and the environment in African indigenous philosophy.
So to that, some might say knowledge is knowledge. All knowledge is universal. For example, if I say, this I'm drinking is made of H2O, that's not Western knowledge. That's just, human knowledge. So you talk about, someone might challenge the idea that there's some knowledge that's indigenous to African as opposed to a universal. I think I lost you.
I'm sorry.
Okay. Did you catch the question? The idea that knowledge is universal as opposed to specific to cultures. How would you respond to that?
I would respond with caution to that, because even science tells us knowledge is not universal when we look at it, beyond the surface.
Okay.
What applies to someone living in the United States who is exposed to a different kind of diet, a different kind of weather, and a different sort of sociocultural upbringing, if you may, cannot in any way apply to someone who lives in Ghana, who eats Ghanaian food, exposed to the weather and also the culture. Let's just look at even medically. We know today that there are certain kinds of diseases that affect people who live in certain weather conditions. And these diseases do not affect other people who live in other, under other weather conditions. And the same with diet. In that way, one cannot say, oh, this disease affects all of humanity. And because of that, let's start, let's go to Hawaii, for instance, or let's go to Japan to pick subjects to study. You can't pick subjects to study from Japan while the disease in question affects only people in other parts of the world. So in that way, knowledge in its intricate and broken down into what it should be is not universal. It is relative. It is relative to what is obtainable within an environment. And as much as those who are not aware might not realize that, as long as you come into that awareness, as soon as you come into that awareness, what you do as a researcher is to step back from what is presented as universal knowledge, to begin to question what is taught in schools as the knowledge, and to start to look instead at the environment of the child. Let's say you're looking at classroom knowledge, the environment of the child, the realities of the child, and the possible future of the child. If I'm teaching a child in Kenya, in Nairobi, and the examples I use to teach the child mirror the realities of a child in Washington, D.C., I am not doing justice to the child in Nairobi. I will only confuse the child. I will only make the child to begin to look at his environment as alien, as strange, as not where he should be, as to separate the child from being responsible for researching his own environment and her own environment in order to find solutions to her own situation, the peculiarities of her own environment. I begin to raise up this child's vision to some other environment that he does not belong to, and he might never have access to all his life. And what kind of education is that? What kind of education separates an individual from his own reality, from his own environment? Education is supposed to open your eyes, increase your knowledge about your environment, make you someone who can critique your own realities in order to bring about advancement, to make a positive impact, not to take you away mentally, emotionally, disconnect you from your reality and make you believe that some other person's reality is your reality and that you should aspire towards someone else's reality. That is miseducation, to put it mildly. And that, I believe, is foundational to the challenges that Africans face. Africans who are supposed to be educated, but who continue to be confused about their environment, who continue to not understand what is going on, who don't even understand the effects of colonialism, for instance, because that education will never expose you to the negative effects of colonialism because it was fashioned by colonial masters. It will not show you the positive things about yourself that you need to build on, because that education makes you believe that everything about you is negative. And as a result, if you don't copy someone else's experience, if you don't try to import someone else's idea, then there is really no hope for you. An education that makes you to indeed look at your environment, look at your reality with disdain instead of curiosity. Curiosity is the foundation for innovation, is the foundation for creativity, is the foundation for growth. And if someone is exposed to that kind of education, even for 30 years, that person is not educated, because that person will have very, very little to contribute to his advancement, to the advancement of his community. Education that takes you away from your community, makes you look at your community members as being inferior just because you were able to, get someone else's education, someone else's reality. And all you want to do after getting that education is get your bank account, filled up and travel to the countries where you've been exposed to. If you are in Nigeria, all you want to do is travel to the United States, travel to Western countries to live, and maybe, feel that if you don't get there, if you're not recognized as having worked for Microsoft, having worked for Google or Facebook, and you don't feel that you've arrived, right? So it's not an education that makes you want to go farm in your community to make sure there is food, because there is abundance of land in your community, and all you need to do is be able to apply some knowledge to that land to make food, to make sure that people are not hungry. It's not the kind of education that makes you question your own system of governance and begin to look for ways to indeed enhance governance in your community. Really, if that education does not in any way, it's not the kind of education that wants you to say no to corruption. It doesn't build loyalty in you to your country. It doesn't build loyalty to your own environment. It makes you just want to exploit the environment the same way the colonial masters exploited your country. It's all in the education. Education that does not. Oh, all right. So I know I can go on and on, so I'll let you continue.
That's an interesting point. It doesn't help you build loyalty. I want to bring up a quick little story, but I don't think I've ever thought about it that way. Like, because I talk to friends often about this disloyalty that I see, throughout the African community, in my own country of Haiti. Everybody is very disloyal, not everybody, but we just have so many people who are disloyal, and they have this fleeing mindset. I was well into my 30s when somebody made me realize how I had been miseducated, because as a kid, I had learned there are 4 seasons, summer, winter, spring, fall. Never saw snow growing up. Never touched it, but I was told about this thing called winter, and that is what I learned. And I was well into my 30s when somebody says, we don't have 4 seasons in Haiti. We have rain season and we have dry season. And that little small thing was really, it really kind of shook me, because I realized how completely disconnected I had been made from my own reality in that moment. And how, if you're learning about winter, maybe that's what you want to go see, is this thing. But tell me from your perspective, what specific aspects of this education is sort of fomenting this disloyalty and disconnection? Some examples from your own observation or even your own experience.
Definitely. You were asking for examples on how our education builds
disloyalty.
Loyalty. And let's start with informal education. Informal education, of course, is the non-organized sort of education, the conversations we have with our parents, older ones, and even peer-to-peer education. And I conducted this interview, well, not interview, but kind of a mini scooping around, asking around some Africans about some terms used in describing Europeans and, Americans, the Westerners in Africa. And I came across a lot of terms that just quickly let the young child listening into an adult conversation know that they are superior to us. So we find in some cultures, the white man is a god. That is in many languages in Ghana, and in many languages in Nigeria, in quite a few languages in East Africa that I talk to people. The white man is a god. Even civil service is called white man's job in many African languages. So working for the government is called white man's job still today in 2021. You work for the white man. That is the literal translation of civil service. And when someone wakes up in the morning and believes he is still going to work for the white man, 60 years after colonialism, and even though you don't acknowledge it, but subconsciously, you don't feel that you are working for yourself. So you are very quick to take that bribe, and you're very quick to see that the government work as their work, and still we don't feel a sense of responsibility. And when we look at when the so-called, okay, when Westerners come into the country with their development ideas, we're not able to stand and say, I do not quite think that will work in my community, because from what I know, my understanding of my community is that that idea is not going to bring about the advancement of, projected development. After my TED talk, I traveled to an African country for a presentation, and someone came to me. He said, oh, he had tears in his eyes, a man. And he said, I just want to say thank you to you for that TED talk. It changed my life. It changed my department. He is a director in a government department in his country. And he said, before I listened to your TED talk, I would not for any reason ever question any statement made by donors and NGOs, and also even when we want to borrow money from the World Bank and other of such international financial corporations, we just go with anything they give us. But after I listened to your TED talk, he said, I cried for days. I saw my mistakes. I called all my department together. We listened to your TED talk over and over. We had conversations and meetings, sat down and decided on what we needed. I think I don't remember his particular area, the department, what his department handled in the days he spoke to me. And he said, and when we needed to get some funds from this international financial corporation, we sat down to negotiate with them, and we brought out our list of what we believe after having consulted with community members, after having gotten our facts right, and we came up with a list of what we needed. He said they refused to even look at us. He said that was when I saw what you were talking about playing out. They refused to look at our list. They wouldn't even give us audience. They just came with their own agenda. They came with their own plans and their strategies and their own experts. And because we refused, they were so angry, so unprofessional in their conduct that they walked out on us. And we said, so be it. No more can we continue to allow you to come and continue destabilizing our communities in the name of development. And yet you bill us for that. You bring in your own so-called experts and you bill us for that. And he said, can you believe what happened, that after some months, they actually got back to us and asked to see our development, our agenda, our plans. So that's just one simple example of lack of knowledge being at the root cause of our disloyalty and miseducation. The fact that you are told that the white man is a god on the one hand, and you also are told that your government work is white man's work, and so you have no part to play in it. All you need to do is go there, make sure you get paid, do whatever you can to survive, bribe, just be corrupt, whatever it is, it's not your business. Because we were, the establishment of governance in Africa was founded on corruption. The Europeans who established governance were, took away resources. It was all about capital flight, resource transfer, taking away corrupt, being deceitfully taking things from Africa and using the resources to build Europe. And that was embedded in, even if it might be unspoken, or if it's been removed from the bylaws and the constitution, it is still there in terms of the way things are handled, in terms of the culture that exists. Right. And so Africans found themselves within that same culture. And we have not been able to take decisive actions. This is not about blaming anyone. It's about Africans taking responsibility for change, just like the director I talked about had to take responsibility for change. So Africans taking responsibility for change. When an African is taught that the only systems of governance that can be considered is either, let's say, capitalism, communism, and of course, communism is trashed, and it's only capitalism. And there is no mention of African communal, system. There is no mention of the system of trade and governance system that existed in Africa prior to colonialism. How do you expect that child to even start to think of ways to tweak the capitalist system in place around in a way that it will bring about further advancement for more people? So it's all about what we say and what we don't say as teachers, and of course as parents, as aunties, and as friends. It's not just the education that takes place within the four walls of a classroom. It's the interaction that occurs on a daily basis across the continent.
I would add to that list democracy, because many people don't know that there were very democratic systems throughout the continent. The Igbo, for example, had a very democratic system, which didn't even have, sort of like hierarchical royalty as we know it. And then even when there was a king, there were councils, and it was a democratic system. But we often think of like, well, they brought democracy. One of the ways people also think is they know how to do things. Their system works, right? So like, listen, they have the technology. I'm gonna pause. I'm not sure if everything's okay. They have the technology. They have the prosperity. They're wealthy. What would you say to that? Like, listen, this isn't about who started, whose system it is. We're just trying to do what works. And clearly their system works. And, something's wrong with our system because we're not the United States. We're not, wealthy. Like, how do you respond to that?
Thank you. That would be a little bit too broad in terms of, looking at their system works and our system not working.
Mm-hmm.
We would probably need to step down and look at individual cases within African communities. Just like you mentioned, the Igbo, the democratic nature of the Igbo traditional governance system. There are other systems of governance in place as well across the continent that worked. And in that way, if you also say the Igbo governing system, for instance, cannot be applied to the whole Nigeria, but it can be applied to the Igbo region, to the part of Nigeria that is Igbo. And that brings us again to the right kind of governance. Nigeria is at the moment trying to follow, of course, the American system, the democratic system, while there are other systems within Nigeria, traditional systems that can be used, that can be built to develop specific communities, while there might be a loose kind of central governance that brings together these different communities with their rich cultural heritage. And that is what most Nigerians are advocating for, a loose federalism, much more than the kind of huge overarching federalism that we have today that is not working. It's so expensive, it's so corrupt, and it's kind of stifles the different positive realities, for instance, governance system that different communities and regions can leverage on in order to advance. So that is one quick way of looking at that. And let's also take the Japanese example. Indigenous knowledge does not say it has to be from this community and it must be traced back to thousands of years. It's open to borrowing ideas from other communities, right, or other countries. The idea is borrowing and not copying. So when you borrow, borrowing is strategic. It's pre-planned. You search around, you pick and choose from different places, and you find out what will work. But there has to be a foundation in place already. In the case of Japan, when Japan felt that it needed to open up more and bring about some changes in its economy, in its governance system, there was a slogan that was used: Western technique, Japanese spirit, right? So that's what was used, and the Japanese went ahead to borrow quite a few ideas from the West to build their economy, but they made sure it was situated within the indigenous, Japanese system across sectors. And I do think that helps the country to advance, to open up, to industrialize without necessarily uh, copying a system that will not fit within the cultural, sociocultural realities of Japan. So that's one quick example of not being too strict and too broad or general, say, oh, this is that way, that is that way. Which one do we, too black and white about it, kind of opening up intentionally with respect for your system, with respect for your knowledge, and also appreciation of the work of others and their knowledge system.
Um, so one of the ways, maybe one of the reasons we're not doing that, I think, might be that we get the impression that they not only brought, democracy and technology, but they brought even education itself, right? And so, what are some things that you think we should know about pre-colonial African education systems and methods that would be useful as we move forward?
Oh, sure. Thank you for the question. Pre-colonial African education educated the whole person. It emphasized community. Education was not just for the individual to get all these degrees and make so much money and feel better than everyone else. It was all about community advancement. And you had asked the question about the environment earlier, and it also was the kind of education that placed value on the environment. And uh, there was emphasis on the happiness of the human person, knowing that that happiness cannot exist in a vacuum or independently of the community. We talk of the Ubuntu philosophy, where I am because we are, right? So if I am going to be happy, that means we have to be happy together. My amassing all this wealth and looking around me to find poverty does not benefit me in any way. That wealth ceases to make any meaning to me when I cannot bring my community up to par, or at least try to do that in every way. So that was the emphasis of indigenous African education. It was also quite intellectual in a natural sort of way, not so much prepackaged, not so much about bringing children in a classroom, but all about taking them outside to encounter their environment. And you'll find a child learning how to farm by farming, not by sitting in the classroom to be taught how to farm. So you will find a child learning how to hunt by going hunting with the adults. And through that, the adults teach him the different tracks of the animals, the smell, the sound, gets to know about herbal medicine, the herbs that can be used to cure diseases by being immersed in that experience. It was all practical. And who doesn't want to see more practical education today? Sitting in the classroom 8 hours a day sometimes and learning all these things and writing these exams that make you study for months, and then once you're done, you get your grades, you forget about the half of what you learned, and you're moving into the next level and wondering what this is all about. and well, getting paid and feeling like, okay, that's for all I went through. So it was not, but that's not about African education. So we do look at a situation where education can be much more experiential. And when you say experiential now, you are now connecting the learner with his or her environment. You can't experience your environment um, in a classroom, right? So you have to find a way to go out there uh, to see what is obtainable, to ask questions of those who were there before you, and to indeed think of ways to make things better based on your experience and what you've learned. So that will be a very quick way of responding to that question.
Thank you. Final question. So can you tell us, one, what are some of the things you're doing? You've written a book, you've done, some public speeches to disseminate this information. What projects are you working on, and how can people get in touch with you if they're interested, or if they can contribute in any way to any of your projects?
Thank you for the question. I think I have my background here. African Child Press is one of the things that we do. We publish books in African languages because
Which ones?
Oh, we have quite a few titles out there. Our website is africanchildpress.com.
Okay.
And we do have titles in Swahili, in Kinyarwanda, in Yoruba, Igbo, Hausa, Mende. Mende is a language in Sierra Leone. We actually just came up with a free book, a free ebook, Mende language free ebook for beginners. It's online. Just put it on YouTube for now. But we're just trying to, because we believe that indigenous knowledge is held in indigenous languages. And we see African languages, just being eroded. Parents want to speak English, French to their children because they feel that makes them more intelligent. That makes them able to understand what is taught in classrooms, as we talked about, which is foreign to the learner. So we are concerned about the erosion of African languages. So through African Child Press, we try to bring back the dignity of African languages. We try to make it more fun again to learn. So we have these colorful books. We have workbooks in African languages. We make some of them free as much as resources allow us to, just to make sure that parent who really wants to teach a child his or her own mother tongue has access to these materials. So that's what we do right now. We also, I'm also the principal of Julani Varsity. Julani Varsity is more oriented towards adults. We produce online courses that target the African environment, that target the African's reality. So we have this course, for instance, that is on Udemy, and the course is Introduction to Ancient and Medieval African History. So this is a course that someone who wants to know objective African reality wants to take. We talk about the African origin of Egyptian civilization, the African origin, were ancient Egyptians, Black Africans. We used scientific research to establish that fact. These are things that no one wants to teach you in school. And we have a course coming up in a month, which is a herbal course. A course on an African herb, Vernonia amygdalina, that has been used to treat diseases in African traditional medicine for thousands of years. Different diseases, diabetes, high blood pressure, cancer. And guess what? Scientists are beginning to conduct research on these plants and to find out that indeed it does have properties, phytochemicals, that can address such diseases. So we are bringing it to the limelight. We're producing this course that will show the folkloric use, that's the traditional use of this herb, as well as the research that has gone into this herb to establish that indeed it does cure quite a few diseases. So that's what we've been doing, just trying to bring this knowledge out there, validate what is traditionally African, what is indigenously African. We have a website, julaniversity.com. We do have a lot of courses there, African-centered courses that we have people coming in to take. register for and take these courses. For now, we do groups of 12, just so we can have this manageable size that we do training for companies, for groups of individuals, and just trying to teach alternative curricula that is not found within African education. So that's the two basic things we do, for the most part. And in addition to personally, I do my writing, do a lot of writing for, on Africa, short essays. I'm a visiting lecturer with the University of Rwanda, College of Business and Economics. And I would say that should be some of it.
You know what, that is plenty, and I will be sure to include the links to African Child as well as Julani University in our description box so that people can check it out. And I will check out this course on Udemy for myself personally. So thank you so much for being here. Let me not keep you any longer than I have, but I really appreciate your time. As always, I like to close by saying Pan-Africanism is not a call for anyone to jettison his or her ethnic identity for an undifferentiated African one. In fact, one of the main objectives is to revive, preserve the unique cultural heritage, including language, socio-political ideal, architecture, faith, and food. And today we've talked about something really important, which is our knowledge system, which are also very diverse, that we have abandoned because of our false beliefs about ourselves. In Haiti, I remember learning something very similar to the white man is God. We used to say, blanc on fait. And what that means is the white man can do whatever you can think of. Like, you see something new, you don't even know who invented it, he can do it. There's no way growing up as a child in Haiti, I would have known, for example, that the traffic light was invented by a Black man. There are just so many things that I've had to learn as an adult, because you grow up in these environments and unfortunately assume that if something was done, if an idea is out there that is good, it must have been made by a white person. It must have been thought by a white person. And it has been my great pleasure for the past couple of years to learn more about who we are and what we've done. I remember just one time, learning about like the history of the Yoruba people. I think I talk about this book a lot, and how old and how far back it goes. And it really made me feel more complete as a person to know that, there's some time in history that I could go back and find an ancestor that was doing something great like 1,000 years ago. And we all have that, and that exists throughout the continent. And so I urge you to check out these websites. I urge you to look into what, the diverse group of African people, pick one, and what you can learn and grow from so that you can become a better African yourself. Thanks again for your time, and have a good day.
Thank you, Amma. Pleasure is mine.